Hello and welcome back to Sharada Sky Reviews. I am your host, Ryan, and we're going to be covering a trilogy of books. Not all today, but we're going to start off with the first book, which is Twisted Pretty Things. It's the Shadows of London book series by Ariana Nash. There are currently 5 out. Not sure how many they have in store, but I have read the first 3 so far. So I have 2 more to read before everything kind of wraps up, but we'll go from there. So, starting off with, this is a book that I really enjoyed overall. We'll get into the specifics with the ratings later, but overall, I quite enjoyed it. It's definitely less romance and just more of a mystery book with romance elements kind of in there. So we'll touch on that as we go through. But as I always start off with things, we're going to be going through the story ahead, and just fair warning that there will be spoilers for some plot points. I'm not going to give you the whole mystery. I am not going to give you a lot of information about the characters or the kind of storylines and arcs that they go through, as I think that's important for your guys' enjoyment if you ever wanted to read this. But I'll just touch on it a little bit more than what would be on the back cover, if you will. So we'll go from there. So starting off, we're introduced to Dom, who is working for the company Kemp Thorne and Co. It's a quaint bookstore gift shop that's essentially a front for a business that contains artifacts, essentially items with intense psychic power, that are dangerous in the wrong hands. As we'll touch on that later. I just go through the introductions character-wise, but in the first couple of scenes, we're introduced to Dom, who is hunting an artifact. He then runs into Cage, who he deems Hollywood. And Hollywood then executes the target, and suddenly the artifact is gone. They don't know where it went, they don't know what happened to it, and they're trying to hunt it down. And then later, Cage and Dom get involved, obviously, with hunting that artifact, and Alex, Dom's boss, goes to show his mansion, the Murder Room, which contains a series of newspaper articles and reports of Leighton starting back in the 70s, as Alex's mother was just going through and researching why and how Leighton's appeared so suddenly in history, if you will. Like what caused them, where'd they come from, what kind of sparked their creation, if you will. So, all in all, this is a universe where magic is real. People who can sense and use it are called Leightons. And there's this huge mystery in this entire first book about how these dirty artifacts keep popping up, and what that essentially boils down to is artifacts that have immense power to the point where if a Leighton got a hold of it, they could unleash world-altering, world-devastating powers at the drop of a pin, essentially. It's very much a thing that you could get corrupted with in terms of if the artifact got in the wrong hands. So that's why Kemp Thorne & Co. exists, to help prevent that from happening by hunting these, illicit artifacts. And we'll touch on the characters as they pertain to this story as well. There might be some spoilers for later books because I am probably blurring them all together at this point, plot-wise, but we'll go through them shortly. So as far as characters go, our 2 main leads are Dom Dominici and Cage Mitchell, the 2 romance interests, if you will. Dom works as an authenticator for Kemp Thorne & Co., and essentially he has magic abilities. He can use a deck of cards as almost like Gambit from X-Men, I believe his name is, where he can cast, not spells, but like he can cause them to explode, do magic with them, essentially, and that's what acts as his focus. He has a crush, even though he doesn't admit it in this first book. He does have a crush and lingering fascination, if you will, with his boss, Alexander Kemp Thorne, but it's not super fleshed out yet. That happens in the later books, but it is something that does get touched on, where he has commented a lot of times on how good Alexander looks, how, if Alexander wanted something, he would be hard-pressed to say no, and that kind of stuff. We do get a little bit of his past in this book as well. He worked previously in the military, and he has some ties to not some less than legal activities as gang-related activities go in this kind of universe. Cage Mitchell, aka Hollywood, as the cast of characters has deemed him, because he looks like a Hollywood star and he's American in London. This whole book takes in London. I don't know if Shadows of London was, enough. But yes, he does have questionable motives, but he flirts heavily with Dom whenever he can, which is basically all the time they're on screen or on page together. And he has a habit of turning up whenever Dom and Alex are usually hunting artifacts. He has a weird penchant for being there, kind of out, without much cause. So he has definitely some mystery behind him, and his relationship with the character we'll get into later, Annie, is kind of one of the focal points for Dom specifically. But these two are what would most typically be called the love interests. But as far as the story goes, it's not solely about these two. The whole mystery aspect takes precedent and takes priority over the romance side. But Dom is essentially tasked with keeping tabs on Cage, and by doing that, he decides to bed him. So there is, I think, at least 2 steamy sex scenes in here. I know there's one that happens kind of near the beginning, but I think there's a second one. And again, I might be conflating the other 2 books with this one as well. But some of the other casts that we are introduced with kind of throughout the story, there's not a lot of them. There's some like cops who come into play, but again, I don't really want to spoil a lot of the story, so I'm picking the ones that show up, and I wouldn't say in the first like 4 chapters or so. We have the Kempthorne and Co. crew. Obviously, Dom is included, but he's on the last slide. We have Robin, who is the quote-unquote manager of the bookstore front. She does a lot more than that, but she is what I would say is like the manager of this ragtag group, besides Kempthorne being the boss and like the one footing the bill, if you will. Robin's definitely the one who is responsible for taking care of, the fact that they have food, the fact that they have tea, the fact that the bookstore actually exists. She's definitely involved with a lot of that, just day-to-day stuff. Gina is another character in this company, and they all live together in Cecil Court. It's a kind of like I'm imagining from what I'm describing, it's like a high-rise building, or like a high-rise building, but like a London-esque building where it's got multiple floors. The first floor being the bookstore, the second floor being like the communal living space, and I think the third floor is the like individual rooms and stuff like that. And I think Kempthorne lives on the 4th floor and something like that. There's also a basement. So it's definitely like the Cecil Court is a character in and of itself, where they have this whole kind of business as well. But Gina acts as an agent researcher as well. She does some bookstore stuff. She covers the bookstore if need be, as it's described as like one of the places to go in London for like niche Harry Potter fans, in terms of like ye old wizard bookstores, And then Alexander Kempthorne, of course, I said he's the boss, but he's the boss in more ways than one. He's obviously the owner of, and manager, I guess you should say, of Kempthorne and Co. He does a lot in terms of the managerial side of their artifact hunting business. He's the one kind of telling them where to go, what to do. If I had to equate it to Torchwood, he would be Jack Harkness, where he's also on the field a lot. He's not just leading from behind like, most government officials. He's on the front lines and stuff. And then we're also introduced to Annie Evans. She works with Cage Mitchell, and that's essentially all I wrote. She does have some plot relevance in this one and later ones as well, but this one, essentially she's just there as his kind of date for one of the galas that they had to go to for a artifact auction, if you will. And that's basically all I want to say for that. Not saying anything too major plot-wise. She's not the main villain. She's not really doing much beyond that. But she is heavily involved in the story as well. More so than I would say like Gina and Robin are, to a point where Gina and Robin are involved, but they're more like supporting cast. Annie's kind of more on the level of like almost Alexander Kempthorne. But overall, the mystery aspect is quite good. It doesn't get fully resolved, and I want to say the mystery that I had in this book, I think it's resolved in the 3rd one fully, but then there's obviously still more that's going on. And it's a solid read. I think there's quite a lot of pages. I mean, it's 319 pages plus, I think it ends on 320. But it's a solid book. It's definitely more of a mystery novel with, like I said, elements than a pure erotic romance novel that I typically read. So this was good. This was enjoyable. And then as far as tropes go, some of the stuff should be obvious. I have stuff I've been saying over and over again this entire time. There's a big mystery aspect. This whole book focuses on the mystery of one artifact that keeps appearing and disappearing at key points. It gets in many people's hands. It does a lot of things as an artifact, but also who's pulling the strings, why is it getting from place to place, how do they know where they're going, kind of like that. Is there a mole? It's a mystery book, it's definitely like a thriller mystery for sure. The urban fantasy element, though, is something interesting. This whole world is fleshed out that both the US and the UK have latents, which are magical beings, if you will. They have their own ways of dealing with it. The US is more forceful. The UK is more not passive, but more hush hush about things, of how they handle things. Like, not sweep it under the rug might be the best way to put it, with regards to what their overall objectives are. For example, Cage will respond with guns first, whereas Dom and Alex would want to talk them down and then, kind of diffuse the situation. It's definitely that kind of dynamic, and they do comment on that with regards to the agency that Cage works for as well. But we follow Dom and Alex hunt magical items with immense power. It's interesting, and it's very fun to read the kind of scenes that happen. The artifacts have like a mind of their own, if you will, and can really influence the wielder into doing things that the wielder may not want to do originally. And it's quite fascinating to read the kind of mindset, how it shifts, because we're essentially in their heads this entire time. And then the last trope I want to touch on, which isn't one that's necessarily highlighted in like the book, like jacket or like the Amazon description, if you will, is the enemies to lovers. Cage and Dom are not starting off on the right foot, and they start off on basically somewhat opposite ends of the side, but then Dom eventually catches feelings, and they do hook up, kind of like I said, kind of early, I would say. But it's definitely interesting, their dynamic, as the story and plot progresses within the next two books after this. Again, I haven't finished the series yet, but it's definitely an enjoyable read following these two and their tumultuous relationship with regards to the world that we find ourselves in and the times we find ourselves in. So from there, we'll go through some rankings. As we go through these, normally, as we have been in the past, we'll go through plot, characters, writing style, spicy scenes, which we'll touch on, as well as just the overall rating. So as far as plot goes, I'd give this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. I had a hard time reading this when I first got into it. When I first got the book, I read like the first chapter and then put it down, and then I eventually got back to it. It's not anything against the plot. It's just, it's not my normal cup of tea, if you will, when it comes to romance novels that I would prefer. The ones that are more like self-contained, stories that are book cover to cover finished, stuff like that. And then as far as characters, as far as plot goes, the plot and mystery makes a lot of sense. I enjoy the characters as they're written, and the plot as it's kind of presented, the mystery as it's presented, and the kind of, climaxes, the fight scenes, the action scenes, they're very good. This is definitely a mystery action thriller book with, again, some romance thrown in for fun, As far as the characters go, I would give this a solid 4 stars. Dom, I think, is my favorite. He's not even a protagonist, if you will, because he's not pitched as like the protagonist, but he's my favorite out of this book series so far. The relationship he has with his coworkers, with Alex, Gina, and Robin, the relationship he has with Cage, his outlook on life, the willingness to sometimes just throw it all away and see what's the point, his more nihilistic viewpoints, definitely relatable as it pertains to, world-ending artifacts that he could just hold and decimate cities at the blink of an eye. That kind of power is corrupting. You can get easily corrupted, and he makes it. He has good in his heart, but he definitely has seen the worst of humanity and would just be easily just ending things. So yeah, as far as the writing style goes, I enjoyed this. This is definitely 4.5 stars, and I say that with trepidation of me not really getting hooked in the first chapter. It took me a little bit, but I do like how fleshed out everything is. The magic, the descriptions, the characterization, the fact that they made Cecil Court basically feel like a home when I've never been there and have only the descriptions to go off of. I think this is a phenomenally written book, as well as the other two that I've read in the series, the next two, which we'll touch on the sequel, or the second book, in the recommendations, spoiler alert. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And as far as the spicy scenes, this is definitely a lower score. It's 3.5 stars for sure. I was going to put this lower. I think there's 2. I might be conflating the multiple books together. But I know there's one, and I remember the one because it comes back as a plot point in the later books. The whole background of the scene specifically, and then the aftermath of the scene, all of that one spicy scene, all come back as a plot point in a later book, which I thought was a nice callback, but also a nice through line, if you will, of these characters and their lives and their kind of struggles together. Overall, though, like opinions, though, I would give this definitely a 4-star. It's a solid book for a mystery thriller. As far as goes, if I had to rank this on an scale, I'd probably give this a 2-star, to be quite honest. But as a book in the things that I'm reviewing that may or may not also be romance as we move forward, they're probably all going to be romance, but I might review some one-off books here and there. But I would definitely say this is a solid read. You should definitely give this a shot. There's nothing that really would prevent me from giving it 5 stars. It's just not to my taste as an romance novel. I prefer more standalone pieces. They could be set in the same universe. I just prefer more, we focus on, let's say, 2 or 3 characters in a relationship and their friends, family, whatever, coming to terms with their relationship, their sexuality, whatever. Less of a mystery kind of novelization of, something that's going to take over many, many books or many, series, if you will. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I wish you guys, I'm not ending it yet, Ryan. What am I doing? I have to go through some recommendations, of course. So obviously, if you liked the first book, and I definitely suggest you guys read it, give the rest of them a shot. I think Tide of Tricks was really, really good and really well written as well. It's the next book in the series, and it definitely picks up right off the tail end of this one, but it definitely, has some scenes, some spicy scenes, if you will, but it's definitely, again, more focused on the mystery thriller aspect of this kind of world that this author, Ariana Nash, has built. And then if you want something more slice of life, more magical romance that is a standalone novel, if you will, Demon's Wish is another series that I have read the first book of, and I have not read the next 2 because they weren't out when I read the first one. But it's about a bookstore owner, another bookstore, that falls in love with a demon, and their life and relationship kind of growing from that. And it's really interesting. And the tagline, "Finding love is hard, especially when you're a demon. Your potential mate is a sacrifice," is a phenomenal line. And I like that book a lot. Again, it's a bookstore. I'm a big fan of like bookstore romances or small town romances. And I like the magical aspect that it takes. There's witches, there's mummies, there's demons, there's werewolves, vampires, so. And so it's definitely in the same vein of magical urban fantasy. So if you have enjoyed the video, I would definitely appreciate a like, comment, subscribe if you will. I'll be doing these every Sunday. I haven't explained that before, but I'm going to aim to get a video out every Sunday. We'll see how I can do that with life, and if things happen, I'll try and let you guys know. I also stream on Twitch. I don't promote myself enough, apparently, so I also stream on Twitch, but you guys may have already came from that. So if you haven't followed me on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/SharadaSky. Basically just my handle on everything, everywhere, at all times. So I will see you guys for the next one. I hope you guys have had a good week, and I'll see you with the next book we're going to be touching on. Have a good day.